All right. Roslyn, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Rosalind Finfrock, and please let me know if you can't hear me or let Jessica know. We had a little phone difficulty on my end, so we're improvising with a cell phone here. But hopefully you can all hear me. I have been with the Department of Justice's Address Confidentiality Program for over 4.5 years now as the coordinator, and I am the sole employee of the Address Confidentiality Program for the state of Oregon. Um, I am excited to bring this presentation to you. I have tailored it down to make it hopefully relevant to you as partners, and we will spend some time on some things that may not be as relevant, but hopefully informational to you, and then hopefully some relevant things to so that you know what our participants, how they interact with other state agencies and how you can help them get in contact with people they need to be in contact with to be part of our program. Looks like we've had a few more people join, but I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully we can keep this under an hour. And my contact information will be on the very last slide. And if we need to present that to you in another manner, we can and get that to you, we can do that as well.
Awesome.
So couple of learning objectives for us today. At the end of this presentation, you will be able to describe the primary function of the Address Confidentiality Program, and you'll probably hear me refer to this as ACP throughout the presentation. You'll also be able to list the 5 eligibility requirements to participate in the ACP, explain the primary responsibilities of a participant in the ACP for those clients that you are working with, and list the first 3 steps an ACP participant should take after being enrolled in the program. So this is kind of what our course is going to look like today. We've got 5 components. We're going to look at what the ACP is, who's eligible for the ACP, how do they apply for the ACP, how do they request ACP status when working with agencies, and what are the requirements for those participants. So first of all, what is the ACP? And typically, I would ask my audience how many of them had heard of the ACP, kind of what they know about that, but we're in a little different scenario today. So we're just going to dive in to hear about what that is. The ACP was established by the legislation in 2006, and in 2006, we started training advocates to enroll clients the following year, in 2007, into our program. And we were designated as a confidential address program for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. And so what our, sorry, I went backwards, go forward here. What our primary function was for those victims is we provide a legal substitute address for them to use with the state and public agencies when they request new public records be created. So we can't do anything with any public records that have already been created, but when they are requesting new public records be created, they can use our substitute address. And in Oregon, the substitute address that we use is a PO box. So when working with clients, you may see that clients have the same address. PO Box 1108 is the address that we use for all of our participants. Another function of the ACP is we are a mail forwarding service. So all of that mail for participants comes to that PO box, and we sort the mail and then forward it out to their mailing address on file with us. And that mailing address can either be their physical address, or they can have a different mailing address on file that's either a PO box, that's their personal PO box, or a safe address like a friend or family's address. So the ACP is just one piece of a safety plan. Having the ACP in place is not going to be a complete safety plan. Most of our participants continue to work with advocates in creating a safety plan, going to and from work, home, school, things like that. Some of them continue to have issues with cyber stalking, internet safety, things like that. So once enrolled in our program, the participant actually has to request that the substitute address be used when they're working with agencies. Nobody else has access to our database besides myself, and a few people who back me up. So when a participant goes into your office, goes into DMV, another state agency, that state agency doesn't know they're a participant in our program until that participant shows them a card that we issue them and asks that that address be used instead of their physical address. And in most times, that agency is able to work with them and use that substitute address instead of their physical address. In some cases, the agency may need a physical address based on federal funding that they receive or another mandate that requires a physical address. And we will talk about some of those agencies towards the end. And I know internally, DHS has some programs that they need a physical address based on funding and requirements. And so we talk about that with our participants as well. Because one address was established for the ACP, the address itself is not confidential. That may sound contradictory, but PO Box 1108 is used for our program and for our participants. So just because they're assigned PO Box 1108, they also need to do some safety planning, as I mentioned. That address is public record as far as how to contact our agency, and my physical address is not public record for the participant or anybody else to come meet with me in person. So PO Box 1108 is a known address as far as being on the internet and things like that. So there are some safety precautions that somebody else may need to take as far as if they feel that just having that PO box on some information makes them a target or anything like that. Some participants prefer to not use the acronym ACP when they give out their address and just use the box number that they've been assigned or ACP code. And we'll talk about what that looks like when it's established and how that is used a little bit later. As far as verifying that somebody's enrolled in our program, I am able to do that by statute and administrative rule for anybody who is doing a public job in order to do their job. So I am able to verify with Department of Human Services, DMV, DOJ's, child support, things like that. Typically, I have a liaison that I work with to just verify somebody's enrolled in our program. And for the majority of the time, we are verifying the correct address used. So that ACP code that they've been assigned. Some cases for child support, we're verifying how long the participant is enrolled in the program so that they can check back at that specific time frame and to verify that they're not releasing the address, the court, or the other participant or the obligor in cases like that. I can also verify participation if the participant has asked me to. So in certain cases, the participant may ask me to work with the school system or a bank to verify their participation when opening a bank account. And we will talk a little bit more about banks and their requirements as we go further along as well. Are there any questions so far? Have there been any questions, Jessica?
It's been quiet so far, thank you.
Okay, I feel like I'm talking fast, so that's why I was going to double check. As far as disclosing a physical address, we are required by law to get a physical address for our participants. The application and keep that updated in our records, but we are not able to release that to anyone without a signed court order from a judge, and that requires the judge to have good cause. And so good cause would just mean that releasing that address is the judge is aware that that may put the participant at risk. If this were to happen, the participant would be notified within 24 hours, and that is one reason we ask that a participant keep a good phone number on file with us, and they are required to notify us within writing of 10 days of any change of address or phone number. And at this time, we have not had any court orders signed by a judge granting or asking us to release a participant's address since 2007 when we started enrolling participants in our program. Other states have different requirements. and releases as far as law enforcement, things like that. We do not have any of those things set up in our program. Mail that we forward within our program, I talked about that all the mail for the participant comes to our program. We are required to forward first class certified and registered mail. But as we started receiving mail, we found that some mail comes as pre-sorted mail. And so pre-sorted standard mail is a lower class mail than first class mail, but some of the agency it comes from are shown on the screen as DHS, public schools, and healthcare providers. So even though it's not first class mail, we've decided to forward that type of mail because it's important, and we don't want to make our participants miss out on those important documents by being part of our program. Because all the mail comes here to Salem, to our PO box, and then is forwarded through Portland, there is sometimes a 5 to even maybe a 10-day delay in participants receiving their mail. Our program serves the whole state of Oregon, and so depending on where they live in that time frame from Portland, they could take 7. I've heard sometimes people say it takes them about a week to get their mail from when I send it out. It was about 2016 when Salem was no longer a distribution center from the post office. So that added at least 1 day to most of our participants getting their mail from our program. So being a designated legal agent, that allows us to sign for any certified or legal, accept any legal mail for a participant on their behalf. So we can sign for any legal documents that are served for a participant here at the Justice Building, and we can sign for any certified mail that's accepted at the post office. We cannot sign for any restricted mail. So if you're with an agency that sends restricted mail, you may have gotten that back saying that we can't sign for that. And as a legal agent through the post office, we're not able to sign for that. That restriction means that the addressee must sign for that. So we'll send that back and ask that you send it certified. Because we're their legal agent, once we sign for or accept the mail in our post office, it's as if that participant has received the mail. There's also in statute a response time of 5 days added to any legal notice that has a response time of 10 days or less. And I don't see a whole lot of those. Most of the things that I see served here to our office are 30-day response time or more. The following is a list of mail that is typically not forwarded to our participants. We do not forward any magazines, packages, medications, Netflix, or anything that would be considered junk mail. And junk mail typically are those things that come pre-sorted standard mail, with the exceptions on the previous list. And we have chosen not to forward these things due to the cost of the program and just for packages, the safety of staff and participants when we would send those out. Most states have similar requirements with some exceptions for medications in those states. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward on who is eligible for the ACP. So this first slide is a little bit hard to see, but we're going to focus going left to right on the little icon, and each represents one of the 5 requirements for being a participant in the ACP. So the first one is that the applicant must reside in the state of Oregon. And parts of this presentation were set up for our advocates who are going to be doing online training. So they would be clicking on some things here to be moving forward on that training. So statute states that the person must be a resident in the state of Oregon to enroll in our program. And so that means their residential or physical address must be in the state of Oregon. But however, we do have a few that have a mailing address outside of Oregon, which is fine. Their residential address is in Oregon. So we see that sometimes in the Portland area or over in the Ontario area, where they may have a post office box in the adjacent or connecting state. So over in Vancouver or Idaho. Next, the applicant must be a survivor or victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and or human trafficking as defined in Oregon statute. Most of the times there aren't any questions there. Every once in a while, an advocate will call and we'll discuss the situation. Sometimes it's around whether that falls on domestic violence or stalking a lot of times. The applicant must also be concerned for their safety or the safety of their children or other household member. So in order to enroll in the program, we'll get to that at the end, they must be 18. But if the victim or survivor is not 18, then somebody over the age of 18 can enroll on their behalf. So if they are concerned for the safety of a child, then a parent would enroll on their behalf. So the applicant must have recently moved or be moving to an address unknown to their abusers and government agencies. So this one has become a little bit tricky since the motor voter law passed in 2016, because some of the applicants our advocates are working with do not realize when they've gone down to DMV that their information has been updated with the Secretary of State and become public record on the Secretary of State's side as a registered voter. That information is public information on the website as a registered voter with a person's name and date of birth. So some of our domestic violence survivors, their information has been out on the internet and they don't realize that. So we've had to reevaluate our policies and then make a determination based on how long that information's been out there as to whether we can enroll a person or not based on their safety. We are not concerned with government agencies that don't make that information public record. So sometimes an applicant may have already gone into a DHS office, gotten food stamps or working with DHS on custody, something like that. If that government agency is not making that information public record or sharing that information, we're not as concerned. But we're also going to be looking at how recent they moved. So a lot of times recent, we're talking about 4 to 6 weeks approximately, but we're primarily looking at any public records that have been created. Talked about the motor voter law a little bit. Our suggestion for advocates is to go to the My Vote website and see if a person is registered to vote. And I'm talking then about their residential address and being on the elections office website. So we can get into more of that if we need to with you guys and your involvement towards the end, or if there's a question about that. So as I kind of alluded to, in order to enroll in the program, the applicant must be 18 years or older, or a parent or guardian acting on the behalf of a minor. If they are incapacitated individual, then the parent or guardian acting on their behalf can also enroll them into the program. So I don't see that as often as I see somebody who is a parent who maybe has children who are also survivors of the crime. So I'm going to pause there and just see if there are any questions before I move on. I'm clipping right through this. I do want to mention, as just to look at any questions, that anybody over the age of 18 or older in the household must complete their own application. So if we have a household with 2 parents, we're going to have 2 applications. I need a signature on file for anybody 18 or older as an adult in order to accept mail on their behalf. So even if we had a household with 1 parent and maybe an adult child, we would need 2 applications. But if there's 1 parent and then all minor children, it would just be 1 application listing the minor children on that application.
That's a really helpful distinction. Thank you.
Yes. Sometimes it's not clear, and so then I'll contact the advocate again asking for an application for that adult person. There are times the minor children are left off, and then I'll get mail. If the mail doesn't have that person's ACP code on it, then I don't know that child belongs to the family. A lot of times our mail from schools and stuff says to the parents of it just lists the child's name. So if I'm not able to look at that child by name and determine what household it goes to, then don't even know that it belongs really to our program.
Mm-hmm.
So I have just a few slides here on how somebody applies for the ACP. I wanted to just let you guys know how that happens, but that's not really the focus of what you're going to be doing. For the most part, you're going to be sending them to a certified application assistant who is going to be going through a training very similar to this. We've just revamped that so that they're mostly going to be done online now versus in person, where they will click through some scenarios and things to be certified and get a number from us in order to do those. On this page, you will see what looks like one of our paper applications, and an advocate will also have the opportunity to do the initial application online and submit that through our portal. And to apply for our portal, this is kind of what it would look like on our webpage. To apply through that portal, get registered and apply through that. Just going back previously to what that application looks like, you can barely kind of see some fields to fill in there that are required from the applicant. Once that's completed and then it's submitted to our office, we are going more paperless through the portal. It could also be emailed, fax, or sent to me by mail. The advocate does not keep a copy in their office for security reasons. The original is submitted to our office and then shredded there at the advocate. We review the application, and once it's accepted, they're enrolled in our program for 4 years, unless they're canceled or withdraw from the program within that 4-year period. As I think I mentioned, they are required to change their address or phone number within 10 days, and that requirement is on the back of the application and is also information sent to them in the welcome packet. So here it talks about the welcome packet being sent to them within 10 business days. Right now I'm a little outside that window. And at the end of the 4-year period, they have the option to renew for another 4-year period. And there is not a limit as to how often they can renew or how many times they can renew that 4-year period. So we still have people in our program that originally enrolled in 2007, and every 4 years they're just renewing. The requirement at renewal is that they still just fear for their safety. They still live at an address that's unknown. They've been following the program and things like that. The application at the renewal period is done through the mail with our program, so you don't need to go and meet with an applicant assistant or an advocate again at that time. So in mentioning the welcome packet, this is a list of the things that are listed in the welcome packet. They are listed here in alphabetical order. Normally I have them listed or would pass them around kind of in the order that you would see them in the welcome packet, being the welcome letter, which is listed at the bottom, would be the first thing the person would see, welcoming them in the program or saying that they've been renewed in the program. They are going to have the authorization card is kind of listed there in the middle, and that's a laminated card. If you've worked with any of our participants, they have a laminated card that has their signature, their name, and then the substitute address, our PO Box 1108. And then our next slide is going to show what I talked about is the ACP code, and that's going to be on their laminated authorization card. The other things listed here are some instructions on how to work with other state agencies, brochures, guides, and forms to help them interact with other agencies. And some of those, I was going to say are on our website, but I think the only one on our website is the change or withdraw notice form. And typically we just call that the change of address form. I don't think the brochures are on our website, but I can get a copy if you guys want to take a look at that. It's over to Jessica. The affidavit of residency form we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's primarily used for schools and enrolling children with public schools. And then the updating voter registration, the SEL 550 form, is to enroll them as a registered voter with the ACP address as their address of public record and not their physical address. So let's move on to what I've been talking about with this ACP code. You're going to see where it's found. If a person doesn't know what their ACP code is, they can find it in their welcome letter and their authorization code or card. This is the code I'm going to ask when they call in. I'm going to ask what their ACP number is, their ACP code. It's a faster way for me to look up their information in the database and to make sure if I'm looking them up by name, I maybe misspelled it or something. There are names that are very similar and spelled differently. I looked up somebody today by the name of Malia, and I was spelling it with an A, and it was spelled with an E, and so couldn't find her at first, but then found her by her last name or date of birth. I don't remember which. But if I leave it on a voicemail, it's easier for me to find them by that code. And so as you can see here, the code is broken up into two parts. Our computer system assigns it a 4-digit household identifier, and that's just sequential as to when we accept their application. And then the 2 digits after the dash are the year they've enrolled in the program. So everybody this year has a 19. The exception to that would be if they had enrolled in a previous year, left the program for another reason, and enrolled again this year in the program. We would go back and find their original file and open that file back up. We prefer not to have 2 files out there for the same person. Over in the yellow column on the left, you will see a couple different ways on how a person can address mail to an ACP participant. The post office would prefer to have the ACP number above the PO box. It can also be listed next to the PO box. But we are also finding that some agencies just are not able to add that many characters after a PO box. So some people are able to add it as an apartment number, suite number, and they're just kind of getting creative in how they can do that. So we are working really hard with our participants to work with their senders to get their number on their mail. I get a large stack of mail, especially on Mondays, that I have to look at by participant name in order to sort. All of our mail and their information is sorted by the year first and then their number. And that's how we sort their mailing labels to send out their mail. I am not sure how you guys do that in your system. Sometimes it's on maybe an attention line or just on the first or second address line. So if we have specific questions about that, we can address those, and that's our questions right now.
I think our system's pretty good at doing addresses, but yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. I know I worked with self-sufficiency, and they have, I think, a way that they are doing that. And then also, the issue has come up with larger agencies that provide services across the state, where if they're using an address in Salem, they have to code it a certain way so they get services in their direct county. So
yeah,
I know
I will double check with the processing center, and for the people who are on the line but cannot speak, just to let you know, I'll make sure that goes up on group site when we put the rest of the materials up, so you have that guidance as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So how do they request ACP status? This is going to primarily look at the different agencies that I have some information on, and I'll talk specifically if I know how that information is. Most of our biggest problems come from private agencies, and in the statute, they're not required to use the ACP address, but most of them work with our participants to do that. And what we're finding is it's those private agencies that we're having a little bit harder time including that ACP code or number in some of their systems, or ends up dropping it, things like that. When somebody is accepted into our program, some of the first steps they want to take is to update their information with DMV. Even if it's not already updated to their current address information, which we hope it's not, because then they might be registered to vote at that address, they'll want to get that taken care of. Typically, you have 30 days to update your address information with DMV. and based on our timeline to turn around things, they're already probably looking at a couple weeks. But we want them to be safe, and if they get pulled over, have that correct information on there. DMV is going to actually require that they see in person that laminated authorization code card that we give them. So there are instructions in that welcome packet that tells participants that. We are going to recommend, and the applicant's already going to have talked with the advocate about this, to tell all their personal contacts about their new address. We are not going to want them to turn in a change of address at the post office, because that actually becomes public record and can put them at risk with their abuser finding out, especially if the last address they lived at was with the abuser. And anytime they can, we want them to use their ACP address instead of their residential address, just for, again, that safety and another layer of protection with where their mail is coming. They always have the decision, though, or the discrepancy on their end, if they need to get something faster than with the time delay of things coming through the ACP. If they feel it's a safe person to give their physical address out to and receive mail, then they are able to do that. So we are going to look at all of these state and local programs and talk a little bit about how participants would interact with them. So I've talked a lot about DMV already, about the motor voter law, presenting the ACP card in person. And when they present that card in person, DMV is going to update their address on their driver's license and vehicle information with the PO box for ACP. Then when DMV goes to send information to the Secretary of State's office, if that PO box is listed, it's not included in what's sent over to the Secretary of State's office. So anybody who's registered with ACP or enrolled with ACP does not go over as part of the motor voter law then to the Secretary of State's office. They're not automatically registered to vote. So that's then why we give them the form to register to vote if they want to. If they're just getting a new sticker, they're changing their address and just getting a new sticker, that's free of charge. But if they want a new actual hard plastic driver's license, then they have to pay the fee for those. For the Secretary of State's office, we already talked about how you can check online to see if they're a registered voter, but there is this SEL 550 form that they can fill out. I include one in their welcome packet with some information on how to fill that out, and that they send that back to the local elections office or drop it off there. They don't send it back to me. The form is going to ask for their physical address, and that is so that they can vote in county or city-specific elections. And then it's going to ask for a non-exempt mailing address, and that's where they list the ACP address, and that's the address that becomes public record. Because they're in a confidential address or have a confidential address, when you search for participants who have registered to vote that way, they actually do not show up on the registered voter or my vote sheet on the internet. For Department of Human Services, some of you may know this information better than I do, so I tend to keep it a little basic. They do want to notify their caseworker of their status, especially if they have anybody within the confines of DHS, a caseworker or somebody else who is maybe a family member of the abuser and may have access to their information. I know I've talked to a handful of participants who this is the case, so that they can code that case correctly or do a paper file if they need to. I haven't really run into this in the last, since probably my first or second year here, about anybody needing to speak with a supervisor or lead worker about marking their case any different or not having anybody know about the program.
I would just make, let's see, I want to chime in really quickly and make sure that we all are on the same page in that for OHP specifically, we have the CCO system, which people will be enrolled in a CCO where they live, not where they're getting mail. So the importance of putting that ACP PO box as a mailing address and then identifying the county in which someone lives so that they can access their medical benefits if they get them.
Thank you for doing that. So yeah, I did not have specific information for you guys directly. I know some of it is different for Department of Human Services, and I know some of our participants have talked to different ones in your office. And I probably should get some specific information when I talk to them of how to word it with you guys so that they get that done correctly. I typically do tell them when they talk to, typically they ask me about OHP. So I do tell them that OHP will need some sort of information about their physical address to get them referred to doctors in their local area. So, but that may be something Jessica and I can talk about off the air.
So good. Yeah, I like.
I do know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that what you said sounds great as far as like talking to less technical people interacting with OHP.
Yeah. I do know that with DHS, the Theater SNAP or TANF, that does require a physical address based on their federal funding. And it's the one that is CAS funded, or the more the CAS side is what it's been referred to when I've talked with them. So, but most participants are fine with that. Just basically knowing that they need that for a specific reason, and then asking how they can keep that safe when they have that information.
Mm-hmm.
So with Department of Justice, mainly we're talking about child support here. The PO box meets all the requirements that child support needs, and child support typically is going to verify with me that the person is a participant in our program, verify that they have the correct ACP code if they have one at all, or ask what that is, and then they want to know that expiration date. So that's that 4-year expiration date. They're able to put that in their system so that they can check again in 4 years. And a lot of times they are working with the obligor in wanting to make sure that they do not release a physical address when working with court documents and things with that obligor. They're wanting to use a substitute address, that's that PO box, things like that. They also comes into play a little bit too with the child attending school. We get things for children who are turning 18 and things like that. And it's different for child support. They don't see that child, even if they've been enrolled in ACP under the parent, as being an ACP participant until after they turn 18 and complete an application with us. So we see that on 2 different parts as well. So they're interested in always knowing too, if once that child turns 18, if they've completed a new application with us. So we're not sharing address information. We're just confirming if they're enrolled in our program and when that time period is up for renewal and if they renew or not. With the Department of Education, I spoke briefly about that affidavit of residency. It's really just a form that the parent fills in, kind of a boilerplate form that gets notarized. They verify that they reside in a specific county for a specific school district. Most of the school districts have asked, when I talk with them, that they fill it out at the school district level and they can get it notarized and then work with the school itself. So by statute or administrative rule, I think it may actually be the school district can know the physical address of the family for placement of the child in the correct school, and then the school will use the ACP address. Some districts do that a little differently. They just want to see the address where the person lives, and they don't keep any record of it. Other school districts keep a photocopy of maybe a lease agreement, something like that. So because we never know what school's going to do what, we would suggest that they opt out of any school directories. We don't always know where that information is pulled from. It's pulled from the district, how that information is put into their databases and things. And there is some information for participants under the McKinney-Vento program if they have some questions on their specific county. There typically is a coordinator with the McKinney-Vento that knows how that county processes those children within that county. So they see children in our program like they would a child that doesn't have a permanent home, so or kind of homeless, as the children in our program are not providing typically a physical address. We're providing a PO box, things like that. Sometimes, if I understand correctly, the school will provide the school's address for the at the school district level. They'll use that in their records once they know what school to place the child in. Then with the judicial department, the interaction we have most with them is for our participants doing a legal name change. And for this name change, I'm mostly talking about a sealed or confidential name change. There is paperwork on the judicial department's website for a name change for an adult and for a minor child. I was notified by the judicial department about 2 months ago that the one for the minor child existed, and that the one we had previously been provided actually had some language that had been redacted from legislature. So I'm now referring people there. Our paperwork had just said that things were posted and they no longer do any posting. So other than that, it was still fine. After somebody does a field name change or any legal name change, they are required to do a new application with ACP. If it is a field name change, we are assigning them a new ACP code for just an added layer of protection and confidentiality. We do run into things with the judicial department where there are family courts and custody, especially if there's visitation, where a judge may require a participant in our program to give out a physical address to the other party, and that compromises their safety and things like that. So sometimes it's out of our hands by our statutes and things. The judge should be honoring the ACP, but based on a mediator or family court situation, they have required that. So sometimes we see a participant relocating or talking to a participant about another option if that's the way the judge is kind of leaning. But sometimes our participants don't want to be in contempt of court, and so they do provide that information. Depending on if they decide to relocate, things like that, then sometimes they decide to leave our program because their address is no longer kept from the other party. Sometimes if I'm not able to help them, they can work with an advocate who might be able to attend court with them to talk about the ACP and their status of ACP and their safety, so that the judge may not require them to release their physical address. For the county clerk, a participant can use the ACP address when filing for a marriage license, but depending on the county, they want to know how that information is shared with newspapers, things like that. I've been told different counties give you the option to share that information, and other counties, the newspaper sits down there at the clerk's office and just writes down all that information that's public record. So just a quick little note there. I'm probably not going to go into a lot of detail about what it says here about on the county clerk and assessor's office about home ownership. It gets to be a very complex issue for our participants based on the real property address and whether the mortgage and lending company will work with our participant to use the ACP address on the deed and then your title and escrow company. So basically you're working with private parties and you're working with public parties. So we have seen it be more successful here in the last couple of years than it was about 5 years ago when I first started getting involved. But it can be a fine balance as to whether purchasing a home is safe for participants in our program. If they work with an attorney, a lot of times, they have been able to use the ACP address depending on their mortgage and lending company and how that's filed with the county. Here are a few federal agencies that we have some information on and how we have worked or how participants work with them. With Social Security, they will need to ask to use the substitute address. And there are some Social Security benefits, just like with DHS, that a physical address is required. So some participants just need to determine if they want that benefit or not. But when I talked to one Social Security person, that's kind of what she came down to. She was kind of like, well, they can either have the benefit or not. So, and again, I think part of it comes to with the funding and what those requirements are with that funding, if that's that many. The Department of State for a passport, they are able to use the substitute address on the passport. You doing it online, I think, is a little more difficult than filling it out on paper, but they may want to provide some written documentation as to why they're providing a PO box versus a physical address. So some provide our welcome letter. A lot of them will provide a copy of their ACP authorization card. We have had a few who don't provide that written documentation, especially in other states, get their passport denied for using a PO box. So sometimes they're getting a little more strict on it, but with that extra documentation, I think we're seeing them get passed through a little bit more. For the IRS, they are able to use the ACP, the PO box, when they complete their I-9, their W-4, and for their taxes. What I've seen this last year is just that ACP code is being left off when filing taxes. And I'm also seeing that some employers are not realizing that they can use the ACP address when filing some of this information, and we're hoping that, like with the I-9, maybe the instructions get a little bit more clear. So instead of saying a PO box is acceptable, they just took off on the instructions for the I-9 that a PO box cannot be used. So it just says address now. It doesn't say you can, but it won't reject it if you do use a PO box on the I-9. So with one employer I was working with, there was some confusion there on how they got trained, but that's not I don't do that training. So for physical addresses that are required, financial institutions require a physical address to provide a customer ID number, and utility companies are going to require a physical address. So the way around that with banks and credit unions is this ruling that came down in 2009, and the financial institutions can accept the street address of the sponsoring agency for the ACP if that state ACP provides a PO box. So for the ACP in Oregon, that would be the Department of Justice, and that slide here shows our physical address on Court Street. So most banks are becoming more familiar with this and have worked with our participants. There are times that the banks will still call and just verify somebody is still a participant. They maybe have the card in front of them that shows an expiration date in 2022, but they want to make sure that that person has been withdrawn or canceled from our program. So that's sometimes when I'm asked to verify participation. Participants will sometimes call too and say, you know, my bank is requesting a physical address and I don't know what to give them. And this is an opportunity for me to either contact the bank or let the participant know this is the address that they should give them. For utility companies, unfortunately, they can't use the street address of the Department of Justice because that's not where the utility is being provided. So anybody who provides a service directly into the home, the participant is going to need to provide that physical address. They can use the PO box as a mailing address and still receive that bill here. Some of them choose to receive bills online and see things online. And many of our larger utility companies, PGE, Comcast, those kinds of things, have safety measures that they put in place, especially for survivors of domestic violence and stalking. So sharing a little bit of that information with the utility company allows that utility company to let them know this is something we have in place for domestic violence survivors. It may be that they don't share information with third parties. It may be that they set it up under a pseudonym. It may be that they ask for PIN and password and set that up with the participant. So it all varies a little bit with what they may set up, but some of those are set up with companies. And if they don't ask the company doesn't ask, those are things I suggest to a participant when I'm talking with them, that if somebody has their physical address, these are things that you can ask them to see if they'll put into place for you. Before we go into this last part, I just want to double check and see if there are any questions.
I think there's one that maybe we could circle back to at the end, but just you've mentioned that there is this training is also for advocates. And so just quickly going over how someone might become an advocate for this population.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if that was appropriate for this population, so I took that piece out, but we've got a few slides on the requirements and responsibilities for a participant that may take us close to 3 o'clock, but I'm happy to stay and answer a few questions. But probably some of these we've already covered, but I will answer that at the end. Let me make a note. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Definitely. So these responsibilities for participants are found on the back of the application that they sign, and also worded a little differently in the packet, the welcome packet in one of the brochures that they received from us. I don't think I'm going to read all of them. I'll point out a couple. They are required to receive all the mail that we forward to them. If for some reason it's returned to us, we will contact them by phone and try to figure out if it was a mail carrier error or missing an apartment number, something like that. But first class mail and things we are required to send, and they're required to accept. What they do with it after that is up to them. If they have a protective order or something like that and they're not supposed to receive mail from someone, then they have to find a way to handle that based on if they receive mail from that person. So any first class mail we are required to send. So if they have a no contact order, then they need to take that mail and go to the police or whatever they need to do with that. I mentioned changing a residential mailing address or phone number within 10 days. If there's any change in household, so a new child's been born, somebody moves out, we also ask that they contact us. For the most part, we ask for that information in writing. However, a new application doesn't necessarily have to be done, and some of it I do take over the phone because a lot of times I'm getting maybe a new social security card and I find out a new child's been born. So really, I just need a date of birth and that child's name. So when I know that that child turns 18, things like that. We do ask that they personally notify all their contacts of their new address when enrolling in the ACP, and we talked about that a little bit already, and about not turning in a change of address with the post office. And I talked a little bit about how that information is shared and how that can be unsafe for the participant, especially if they were living at the house with the abuser that they left. Basically, if they turn in a change of address with the post office, there are 2 letters that go out, one to the old residents and one to the new residents. So that abuser is going to get a letter at that old address if he's still there. Also, if he or she is smart enough, they can send a letter to that same address where he or she may be living to that new person or to that person they were living with and say, do not forward. If there's a change of address sent in with the post office, that letter will come back with that yellow label, that new address. That new address then has been sent back to the abuser and has been compromised. Change of address information is also available to third parties and can be sold to those people that send you magazines, and that's how you start getting all that stuff like that. It can be a complex thing to explain to a participant, and I don't want to get into the details. If you have questions, we can talk about that. There are times it can be safe, but for the most part, it can also interfere with us sending mail to the participant. So we just suggest that they don't do one. Using their ACP code, limiting the number of people who know their physical address. And we do that so that they are only giving it out to people who are safe and who need their address. But we by no means want to tell them they can't give their physical address out to anybody. We ask them to do a renewal application prior to their expiration date, and they have 30 days to return that to us. And then if they don't want to be in the program any longer, we ask that comes in writing to us. These are also reasons we could withdraw them from the program, and some of these go right hand in hand or are the opposite of their requirements to notify us. not submitting a renewal application, not notifying us within 10 days of whenever there's changes with an address or phone number, not notifying us of a legal name change. Those types of things are going to get a cancellation letter, and they have 30 days to appeal. If their mail's returned to us as undeliverable, we're going to send them a cancellation letter, and again, they have time to appeal. If they move outside of the state of Oregon, they're no longer eligible to be part of Oregon's program. So what we are going to do is, if they give us a new address, we will forward their mail for 30 days and then try to get them enrolled or provide them information to enroll in the other states' programs. So I think there are just about 43 or 44 states that have programs. About half of us are called address confidentiality programs, and the other half are called Safe at Home. So like in California, it's called Safe at Home. Up in Washington, it's address confidentiality. We are all governed by a variety of state offices, some Office of the Attorney General, some Secretary of State, and in Colorado, it's by a totally different office, administrative office. So it all varies, but for the most part, we do the same exact thing, cover the same victims, survivors, and have the same kind of goal in mind. That is all I had to cover, but I will address in an advocate. In order to be an application assistant, that is an advocate who works for either a domestic violence, sexual assault nonprofit agency, or for like a victim assistance agency through one of the DA's offices. They are required to have an additional 40 hours of sexual assault or DV training, and then take the class that we will have online, hopefully on September 1st, through the ACP. And then they complete a certification through us, and they renew that every 2 years rather than every 4 years. And then we have some requirements of them. We ask them, to meet with an applicant to fill out the application, discuss what the program does, and then by signing the application, they're actually, I lost my word, recommending the applicant for the program, saying they meet the qualifications, those 5 requirements, live in Oregon, they're survivors of domestic violence, they're 18 or older, all those types of things. So
thank you.
Their training will be a little bit, they've got some scenarios in there to walk through and basically determine if somebody, is eligible for the program and why or why not. So, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much. This was a lot of really great information. And just sort of to piggyback off of that, you all as application assisters for the Oregon Health Plan, you will run into this population who are already signed up for the address confidentiality program. And also, I'm sure that you will sometimes see people who may be interested in enrolling in it. And so it looks like, in fact, this is the perfect slide for this because there's a web address, there's contact information. Yeah.
So you can send them here. There is a link on our website that has a map of application assistance for ACP. So they can click on one in their area. It's a little difficult for me to always keep that updated, so they can always call here. We are hoping to get more of them trained out in the field once September 1st comes along and our online training goes live. Right now in some of your eastern counties, we are lacking application assistance right now due to certification expiring or people leaving the agencies.
Thank you so much. I'm actually getting kicked out of my room, so that's a good sign that we should probably close this down. But we'll make sure that some information specific to how to best put contact information into our online one system will go up, and I'll check with Rosalind on that. And thank you so much for attending, Rosalind. Thank you so much for this training.
Thank you.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.